Good afternoon and welcome to this series of webcasts about future of redevelopment in California. Today's topic is going to, of course, deal with the issues of AB 26 and AB 27, first extraordinary session. We've given you a kind of gotten lots of questions. We're going to get to all of those questions, and we're going to get to the questions that you send in via the live line that we have. But let me start by first of all introducing myself. I'm John Shirey, the Executive Director of the California Redevelopment Association. With me today on my right is Brent Hawkins with Best, and Koehler. He is our General Counsel here at CRA, but also our Legislative Counsel. Then on my left is Gus Koehler, head of his own firm, Time Structures. Gus does a lot of research work for us, and in particular, the calculation of the numbers that you would have to pay if you sought to stay alive under AB 27(1)(x), and those numbers were posted on our website yesterday and sent to you. Let me just give you a little bit of an update on where things are. As you know, the governor vetoed the two primary budget bills last week, which brought into question, well, what about the various trailer bills, including the two redevelopment bills? Those bills are still being held in the Assembly. They have not been sent to the governor, and so to answer one of the questions we received, he can't really sign them or veto them because he doesn't have them. They are being held. We are probably in about an hour's time going to be putting out a release and memo that Betsy Strauss and Nielsen Merksmer, another one of our law firms, have prepared. Betsy Strauss is Special Counsel of League of California Cities. We're bringing into question whether or not the legislature can legally send him those trailer bills, including the two bills on redevelopment. There's a body of law which says that legislature can't send bills that appropriate money to the governor if there is no budget. Obviously, in this case, we have no budget. So the status of those bills will continue to be in limbo. In the meantime, of course, the state still needs a budget. The governor is meeting with Senate Republicans, probably as we speak, to again continue those negotiations on whether or not some sort of compromise can be reached on a budget package. No one knows the outcome of those talks, and we'll just have to keep you informed each day as events unfold. So right now, we don't know the future of the budget package in total for the state. Last week was not a good week for redevelopment, with both the Senate and the Assembly voting to abolish redevelopment and then saying, well, you can resurrect your agency if you're willing to make payments. They characterize those as voluntary payments, but we view them as not very voluntary if the alternative is death, and that's exactly what the first bill proposes. We want to thank all of you that have been contacting legislators that voted with us, therefore they voted for bills. We also thank those of you that contacted legislators that voted against us, who should be held accountable and should be asked to explain their votes to abolish redevelopment, along with it the jobs and the many community projects that will be lost as a result of those two votes should these bills become law. You need to keep it up. You're doing a great job. We understand that some legislators had a pretty unpleasant weekend because they had to face local officials back home in the districts. They had to face questioning by the press, and that's okay because they could still ask the speaker particularly to continue holding those bills and to give them a chance to vote for something else, such as the CRA and league alternative on providing voluntary contributions to schools, and also the various bills that we have pending that would provide meaningful reforms to redevelopment. I understand that Some people on the call here today may be reporters. I just want to make it clear that this is not really a press conference. I'll be happy to answer your questions afterwards, or you can call our press person, Kathy Fairbanks, at area code 916-443-0872. Again, we want to answer questions of the press, just not during this time that we've reserved for our agencies and our associate members. If you find that you cannot make the payments under AB 27, we would like for you to notify CRA. We would like to talk to you about that situation because if you can't make the payments, we might like to ask you to do a declaration in the event that we have to file a lawsuit. If these bills or something like them become law, the League and CRA are prepared to file a lawsuit. First, a request for a stay so that the status quo would be held so that the greater issue of litigation could be worked out. So we would have two actions in mind. One, a request to the court for a stay, and a second action, which is the actual lawsuit claiming that these two bills violate the Constitution. So if you're in those situations where you don't think you can make the payments, and we've heard from several of you already that you can, we would like to hear from those of you who haven't contacted us yet. Now, we have a lot of questions. These are the advanced questions that we've gotten already, and we have more questions coming in as I'm speaking. Many of those questions deal with issues about the formula for these payments, what the law called for in the way of this formula. It's a different formula than we had under CRAF or ERAF. We have questions about how those numbers that are in our spreadsheets were calculated. And so what I'd like to do first is start with brief presentations by Brent and Gus, because I think they'll be able to answer several of the questions that we received about the formula. So Brent, why don't I ask you to go first to explain what the law specifies.
Okay, be happy to, the best I can. I guess I should preface with what I'm about to say with a remark that in some cases the language of the bill is unclear, and in other cases it's clear but it doesn't make any sense. So we will we'll do the best we can to describe how we think this will work. The first point I want to make is that in making the computation, the Department of Finance uses data from the 2008-2009 Controller's Report. You know, you fill out the information for these reports annually, you transmit them to the Controller compiles them and publishes them, but they are behind. This is not something new, they've always lagged several years behind. And the most recent Controller's Report that is complete is the 2008-9 data. Obviously, that's going to result in some problems because for many agencies, circumstances have changed in the last 2 or 3 years. And the numbers that you might otherwise use to compute your payment have changed significantly. As we'll talk about in a minute, there is an opportunity to make a limited appeal on the determination of the agency, the amount of the agency's payment based on these 08-09 figures. But this is the only data that is available statewide, and it's what the Department of Finance will use to make these computations. Now, it's up to the Director of the Department of Finance to make the computations and to notify agencies by August 1st of this year. Some of the questions we've received indicated that perhaps it was the agencies that were responsible for making the computation. That's not the case. The Department of Finance will make the computations and notify the agencies. So the methodology for the computation works like this. And Jeff, if I could ask you to to put up a little, some slides to help me through this. Okay, so as I mentioned, it uses the data from the 2008-9 controllers report. Okay, and then the next slide. The first step that the Director of the Department of Finance will take is to determine the net amount of tax increment that's allocated to each redevelopment agency and to all redevelopment agencies statewide. And net tax increment is defined as gross tax increment less one, pass-through payments that the agency makes, both contractual and statutory, and two, amounts used to pay for tax allocation bonds and interest payments specified in the controller's report. That is not an entirely clear statement. Agencies obviously have other kinds of debts besides tax allocation bonds. We don't know whether the legislature really intended it to limit it to tax allocation bonds or whether they meant other kinds of indebtedness. That's something that we would want to get clarified. But the basic precept is that net tax increment is gross, less pass-through payments, and debt service on tax allocation bonds, as shown in your 08-09 controller's report. Now, there are a couple of other smaller deductions, like the property tax administration fee that goes to the county, but those are the principal deductions to determine net. So then the next slide, Jeff. Once you have that number, then the Department of Finance determines each agency's proportionate share of the statewide net tax increment by dividing each agency's net tax increment by the total statewide net tax increment. So that gives you basically a ratio or a fraction that you then, next slide, for each agency you take that fraction and multiply it by $1.7 billion, and that will give you a dollar amount. Next slide, you would then do the same thing for using gross tax increment instead of net tax increment. And then next slide, average the agency, the two figures, the agency's payment based on net tax increment and the agency's payment based on gross tax increment, and that's the amount of the payment for fiscal year 2011-12. Now, in fiscal year 2012-13 and in subsequent fiscal years, the computation is a little different. So if we can go to that slide, Jeff. You start off with a base payment that is equal to the amount of the payment for 2011-12, multiplied by a fraction, the numerator of which is $400 million and the denominator of which is $1.7 billion. Now, I will tell you that I nearly flunked algebra in high school, but as near as I can tell, the fraction that yields is about 0.235, so about 23.5%. I'm hoping Gus will back me up on that. That figure is then adjusted by the percentage growth or decline in what is called total adjusted tax increment. And they define total adjusted tax increment as gross tax increment less debt service or other payments for new debt or obligations issued after November 1, 2011. So if you issue debt after November, there's an adjustment to that payment based on the amount of that indebtedness. Now, to that figure, you would add, next slide, Jeff, 80% of what's called the total net school share of debt service or other payments for new debt or obligations if issued after November 1, 2011. Now, there's quite a bit of confusion about what this is all about. The statute defines net school share as the share of tax increment that would have been received by schools in the absence of redevelopment, less pass-through payments to schools. I think what this is really about, although it's certainly not artfully done in the statute, is, as you'll recall, in the negotiations that have been going on this spring, one of the issues that has come up and found its way into some of the bills is that on a going forward basis, tax increment financing should exclude the school share. And I think this, this provision is intended to implement that idea. So that if you do tax increment financing after November 1, 2011, you basically have to, you're going to increase your payment to the state by the amount that otherwise would have gone to the schools. So it's a way of kind of redirecting the school share. The bill also says, next slide, that the legislature intends to enact legislation in the current session that would reduce payments of the school share for debt issued to fund projects that achieve statewide goals with respect to transportation, housing, economic development, job creation, environmental protection, and remediation and climate change. So the idea would be that this, if you issue new debt after November 1, you've got to take out the school share unless the debt is being issued to achieve one of these statewide goals, in which case you would get to keep more of the tax increment. And the details of that we simply don't have. This is in legislation that is to be enacted later on in the session. We haven't seen any drafts of it. We don't know anything more about it than this brief cryptic provision in the statute. The next thing I would like to do is to briefly run through a timeline of how AB 26 and 27 would be implemented. So Jeff, you could maybe put up the first slide on that part of it. So the governor hasn't yet signed the legislation, but if he were to sign the legislation, from that point on, no agency may incur new or expend monetary obligations except for enforceable obligations. And there's a long definition of what constitutes enforceable obligations. It's basically any bonds, debts, contracts, or other obligations that the agency has that are in effect before the governor signs the legislation. The next slide, number 2, within 60 days after signature by the governor, but not later than September 30th, 2011, agencies are supposed to adopt an enforceable obligation schedule. This is a schedule that identifies what an agency's enforceable obligations are and what the debt service payments are, and that will be the foundation for future payments. Then third, by August 1, 2011, the Department of Finance notifies cities and counties of the amount of the payments they will have to make in order to continue to operate as redevelopment agencies. August 15th, next slide, is the last day to file, for an agency to file an appeal of the Department of Finance's determination of the amount of the payment. That appeal is limited to the following 2 things. First, that the information in the controller's report is wrong, or second, that the percentage of tax increment that is necessary to pay for tax allocation bonds and interest have increased by 10% or more since the 2008-09 report. So if you've issued bonds or other obligations in the last couple of years and your 08-09 controller's report is inaccurate for that reason, and it's significant, it's more than 10%, then you'll have the opportunity to bring that to the attention of the Department of Finance. By September 15th, the next slide, the Department of Finance decides those appeals. The Department of Finance can extend that to October 15th. Next slide, by October 1st, this is sort of the doomsday date. Agencies are legally dissolved and their assets are transferred to successor agencies. If they haven't adopted one of these ordinances making the payments, and but if the city or county has not adopted the ordinance obligating themselves to make the payments to the state, by October 1st, then the city or county can adopt a non-binding resolution declaring their intention to do so by November 1st. And the effect of that is to delay dissolution of the agency to November 1st. So if you get to October 1, you haven't quite got it all put together to adopt this ordinance, committing yourself to make the payments, then you can adopt this non-binding resolution and give yourself another 30 days. By November 1, 2011, next slide, Jeff, the ordinance committing the city or county to make the payments must be enacted and the controller notified. We read enacted to mean that you must have had a first and second reading on the ordinance. I don't believe that it requires the 30-day publication period to have run. Next slide. By December 1st, if the deadline was extended by the Department of Finance because of the appeal, then December 1st would be the deadline for the ordinance committing the city or the county to make the payments. By January 1, the city would need to have adopted a recognized obligation schedule. By January 15th, the first remittance from the city or county is due. That would be half of the total amount. By March 1st, 2012, the county auditor controller is charged with completing audits of each redevelopment agency and transmitting those to the Department of Finance. And then on May 15th, 2012, the second remittance would be due for the remaining half.
All right, that's the long story on the formula from the legislation. I understand that during that, some of you may have lost sound while we were showing those slides. I don't know how many that was, but we're going to post those slides online after this webcast. So if somehow you lost out on those, we'll still have those back up, and obviously we'll still be here to answer questions at CRA after this webcast. Let me turn to Gus Koehler right now, who is our researcher and the person who put together those spreadsheets, and let him make some comments about what he did to come up with those numbers for you.
Thank you, John. We did these very quickly, and I think you need to keep in mind that these are estimates and not set in any kind of stone. We interpreted the statute as carefully as we could, and you should use them as planning documents. I think John has always said this, but I think it bears repeating. And the real obligation will come from the Department of Finance. Brent has already done a nice job of giving us an overview of how the legislation works, and so I'm going to rather laboriously, I admit, kind of go through how we did the $1.7 billion obligation payment for you, and we're going to use a chart, the chart that we prepared, and you'll see the numbers as we go along. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to go through this carefully, and as I refer to the columns, that'll give you an idea of where to look so you can see what was done. So step one was, well, first of all, the obligation is an average. I think that's the important thing, and this leads to some unusual results. Like in some cases, in the $1.7 billion estimate, it leads to an apparent negative payment. And I'll explain why that comes up in a minute. So anyway, the first step, and I'm going to go about this a little bit differently than Brent did. The first step is we look at the agency's percent of the state's 2008-9 gross tax increment, which is column 2, and that's multiplied by the obligation of $1.7 billion to produce the agency's portion of the $1.7 billion. That's column 3. So you're looking at first as a portion or a percent of the total tax increment. Secondly, the new ABX 127's new definition of state tax increment, which was laid out for you, is the 2008-9 gross tax increment, column 1, minus the sum of the agency's existing pass-throughs, tax allocation, bond payment, and its total interest expense. Now, this total interest expense is sort of a mysterious number, and I think that it comes off of Table 4 in the Controller's report, and it includes the basically the total debt interest expenses, which is the lion's share of this number, the low and moderate income housing fund interest, the capital expense interest, and the special revenue and other funds interest. That's our best guess of what that number is, and it's mentioned in the legislation as the interest expense. So anyway, that's used there. So the result of that addition is column 6. And that can be negative because the total of column 5 exceeds the gross tax increment. And that's where we begin to see the negative begin to come up. So ABX 127, column 6, is added up for all agencies to get a state total net tax increment, and then divided by the agency's net tax increment to get a percent, and that's column 7. That is of the total tax increment, net tax increment. So you have these 2% now that you're using to estimate the obligation of what the payment would be. You have two payments, one based on the gross and one based on the new net. And these two are then added together and divided by 2, since there's 2, and we're looking for the average. So the actual obligation is the agency's portion of the $1.7 billion based on its percent of total tax increment, plus its portion of the $1.7 billion obligation based on the agency's percent of the ABX 127 next tax increment, that new definition, divided by 2. So that's how we got to your $1.7 billion obligation. Now, a key question that's come up several times is, why do some agencies have a negative obligation? Well, 8 agencies have that problem, and in every case you'll see that the ABX 127's next tax increment is negative, and that's on the table before you, because their tax allocation bond payment plus interest expense is more than the 100% of the 0809 gross tax increment based on base payment, which is column 5 versus column 1. And the last column shows the percent difference. So that's why you see that negative. Their percent of the total ABX 1-27 next tax instrument produces a large enough negative number, and this is the problem, that when it is averaged, you end up with a negative payment. And that's the result, unfortunately. And so, for example, if we added a negative 20 and a positive 10, the result would be a negative 10, and we divided a negative 10 by 2, we'd get a negative 5, and that's the result. Now, in a few cases, there was actually the new net tax increment comes out, the estimate of the payment comes out negative 2, but the amount of the gross tax obligation is large enough so that when you average them, you still come out with a positive payment. And that's basically the way this works. So I know it's complicated and difficult. I'm sure we'll be putting a summary of how that was done up on the net when we're done with this, after we have a chance to review it. Also, I want to say that I think the 400 million one needs to be looked at again, and we'll probably be taking that back to make sure that we got that accurately. That one I'm not happy with at the moment, so thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brent and Gus. I know that was fairly complicated and technical, but several of you asked technical questions, and hopefully we provided you answers. Obviously, we did those calculations for you. You don't have to do them yourselves. I want to clear up one thing. We put out some guidance to you the day the bill was up for consideration, and people were asking us, well, what would our payments be under this legislation? Well, we had no way of sort of doing these calculations instantaneously, and I said to people, you know, just look at what your payment was in May of 2010 and then May of 2011. They'll be roughly in those ranges. Well, that proved to be not very good advice because this formula has made a lot more changes. And so some of you, when you compare the payments that we have posted now, for example, for the 1.7 billion, and you compared that to your payments in May of 2010, you found a big difference. Well, that's not a mistake. That's just the way these numbers worked out. By a new formula inserting the issue of debt obligations and interest payments, it did make a change in the numbers. Some of you went up, and some of you went down, and like Gus points out, we've got these odd situations of 8 agencies where their numbers are negative or in effect zero. So apologize for maybe misleading you on that issue, but we were just trying to get you some rough estimate for purposes of lobbying legislation last week.